when WCW goes under, you're not able to buy it. We know the story. If the shoe was on the other foot and WCW had bought WWF and you're in charge, do you think that you would have utilized that property or not?
Yeah, I would have. Probably not unlike Vince McMahon did, is I would have just used it to just prove the fact that we were better than them and we beat them. And honestly, I don't know if this is going to be a follow-up question. I probably wouldn't have brought Vince McMahon in. That idea would not have occurred to me. But would I have utilized their footage and the history and the backstory and the war and how we beat them? Would I have produced my own WCW Monday Night War videos and made myself look like the smartest in the world? Sure.
It's interesting that when you were with WB for the GM run, there was various points where you would be on these panel shows, or you did the book, you did the DVDs, and you knew that they were going to paint the history the way they were going to. How did you feel about that? Did you just kind of accept it? Did it ever annoy you?
I didn't care, because if they're going to put a microphone in my hand and ask me questions, I'm going to have my opportunity to tell my story and give people my perspective, and then it's up to the fans. Yes, I knew it was going to be tilted. I knew there was going to be revisionist history. But I also knew that there's going to be a camera. There's going to be a red light on that camera. And I'm going to have a microphone. And I'm going to be able to share my side of the story. And then I just let the audience decide what they want to believe.
Did you find it easy to do a panel show with Michael Hayes, basically telling you how great WWF was and how bad WCW was?
I like Michael a lot. I have a ton of respect for Michael. We've become friends. But at that time, he was very resentful of me, and he was drunk as I'm not kidding. Jim Ross was right there with him. But we sat down, and there was like a bottle of vodka under the table. And on one side of the table, and there was scotch on the other side of the table. And that thing took about 4 or 5 hours to shoot. By the time we were halfway through it, Michael was hammered. Go back and watch it. If you can't tell that Michael Hayes was hammered and angry and resentful and wanted to just beat me into the ground, then maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure you'll see that.
You've talked about how when WCW ended, it was like a relationship ended. So that was it. It was done. And then in 2002, you decided to go and work for WWE. I mean, how do you go from this is over, it's not going to happen, to I'm going to go and work for the people that I have slated vociferously for years? Enough
time had gone. I did. As you pointed out, once the WCW thing fell apart and I wasn't going to be able to purchase it, I made up my mind that wrestling is now in my rearview mirror. I need to reinvent myself. I'm going to pursue other things. And I did, and I was successful doing it. I was producing independent television and doing – I was actually making more money outside of wrestling than I ever made in wrestling, to be honest about it. So I didn't need wrestling. I had divorced myself from it emotionally, and I was fine. But like a year went by or so, and I got a call from Vince McMahon. And it was a very great conversation. Vince said something to the effect of, hey, it's not verbatim, I'm just trying to characterize it. He said, hey, Eric, I would like to think if WCW would have come out on top, things would have been differently, that you would at least reach out to me and give me an opportunity to come and work for you. But I'm in. It was such a gracious, kind, and I think sincere thing for Vince to say. It just made a huge impression on me. And I went, In my mind, I'm thinking, if I do this, if I go back and I go to work for WWE as a talent, and this is going to sound arrogant and cocky and conceited, and it is, but I was really good as a character. And I knew I had a lot of confidence in my ability to perform on camera. And Vince didn't want me to come into management. He didn't want me to come into creative. He just wanted me to come in and be a character. And I thought, my wrestling career ended in a very way. It did not end on a positive note. And I thought, this is my opportunity to get back into the wrestling business and do something that I know I'm really, really good at, and have an opportunity to work with a lot of amazing talent that I had never worked with before. So that if it lasted 6 months, if it lasted a year, if it lasted a year and a half, whatever it lasted, it was my opportunity to rewrite my professional wrestling story so that it ended on a positive note. And that's why it wasn't the money. I didn't need the money. But I needed, for my own peace of mind, to end my career on a positive note. And Vince was giving me that opportunity. So it was so easy for me. That phone call with Vince, it maybe lasted 10 minutes. It might have been 8. It was a very short conversation. And I went back into the house because my office was, I had a guest house on my property, and that's what I used as an office. And I went back into the house, and I told Lori, I said, my wife, Lori, I said, guess what? I'm back in the wrestling business.
What is if you had to pick one, your favorite moment as Raw GM?
Chuck and Billy. The Chuck and Billy wedding. I said, somebody here tonight, raise your hand or scream out loud. You brought me a big 8x10 of me in that full makeup. Right over here. It's f***ing awesome. I told you, right? I said that was the most fun I ever had as a character. Doing anything, NWO, anything. That scene where I was in that rubber mask and dressed up like an old man. We are gathered here today on this occasion to honor the dearly Chuck and Billy. And if you can say one thing that takes more than 3... Did I just hear myself say 3 minutes? That was so f***ing awesome. That was so well written. The makeup artists, I mean, WWE probably spent $30 to $40, maybe $50,000 to pull that off. They flew me out to Los Angeles. I went to a studio that specializes in special effects for feature films. I walked into the studio, and it's gigantic. And they have examples of their past work, of all the things that they've done for feature films, makeup and masks and all this stuff. It was like every major film I've ever seen, they did when it came to special effects and makeup. I spent a full day in Los Angeles. You know, they put my face in a mud cast. I had to sit there like for 4 hours in a mud cast with straws in my nose so I could breathe. But they took a mold of my face, and then they made the rubber mask. And that took them about a month to actually create the mask that I ended up wearing. Then the day of the show, and it was in Minneapolis where I used to live, I had to get to the arena. I think it was the Target Center at the time. I had to get the arena. Normally, I never had to get to the building till about noon or 1 o'clock as talent. I had to get there at 9 o'clock in the morning because they had to fly 3 makeup artists from Los Angeles to Minneapolis to apply this mask and to create that look. And it took them about 6 hours. I sat in a chair for almost 6 hours getting this thing applied. And when I finally got done, I stood up and I looked at myself and I almost had a f***ing heart attack. So what happened to me? God damn. I'm never going to come to Minneapolis again. The water sucks here. But it was so cool. I got to tell you a little sidebar story. So this character, there was a guy that used to work at WCW. His name was Jim Barnett. And Jim and I were friends, and I'd go to his office almost every morning because he would say, my boy, do you have any dirt today? Because he just loved like the Dave Meltzer, he just loved the drama and the dirt and all the crap. Have you heard about this? And I loved Jim. He was so much fun. I started my day every day listening to Jim. But he had this kind of a very, like Truman Capote kind of thing, you know. So I said, when I'm in this old guy character, I'm going to have that same voice. And my father was paralyzed at a very young age, and he would hold his hand in a certain way. So I just kind of put it all together. And I came out there and I was hunched over and I'm doing this. But I had to practice it all day long because I'd never done anything like that before. So after I got this makeup on, I'm walking around backstage in the Target Center. Now I'm in full makeup. And I'm walking around, hey, young lady, how are you? And here's the funny part. So I look over because I grew up in Minneapolis. I went to high school in Minneapolis. I was on a high school wrestling team, and I did a bunch of stuff in amateur wrestling. But there was a guy by the name of Brad Ringens who eventually he went on to work in WWF. He trained Van Vader. He trained a lot of the guys that came up through Vergana's territory. There was a lot of them. But he was an amateur wrestler at the same time. He was a year older than me. But I knew him. You know, he went to a different high school. But I was very well aware because he was a great amateur wrestler. He was a heavyweight. I was 145 pounds, so we never competed against each other. But he was like a superstar amateur wrestler when we were in high school. And he went on to college, became very successful. And I think he made the Olympic team that the year that Jimmy Carter canceled the Olympics. Brad Ringens was actually competed and won a spot on the U.S. Olympic team, even though the U.S. didn't compete that year. So Brad and I had been friends since high school. We used to hunt together. Brad was friendly with my son. We've known each other for a long time. So I see Brad Ringens backstage. He'd come over to say hello to some friends that he had in WWE. So Brad's standing there, and he had his two stepdaughters with him. One of them was like 10, one of them was like 8. And Brad is a very, he's not an outgoing person. He's a very shy person, right? So he was just standing back there by himself with his two little stepdaughters, just minding his own business. And I saw him. Hey, little girl. You smell really nice. Joe Biden, no right? He stole my I created that character. That mucker father. It's not fair. But I literally now, by the way, Brad Ringens, his head was this big. His shoulders were this wide. He could have ripped my arms and legs off and picked his teeth with them. He was that much of a badass. But I was dressed up like an 80-year-old man. You're not going to beat the out of an 80-year-old guy, right? I don't care who you are. So I'm going up, I'm smelling his stepdaughter, and I said, little girl, I have some candy in my room. I shit you not. And I'm looking at Brad, and he did not know what to do. He was like, what do I do? And I never told him it was me. I just walked away. I'll be back in a little while.
This is taking a turn, everybody.
No, that's not even the best part. So the best part, Brad stays for the show. He's backstage. He's got his stepdaughters. He never realized it was me under the mask. Then he was watching on a monitor, and I pull my mask off, and it's me, and now he's hot. Because I ripped him so bad. I thought he was going to kill me.
It was a simpler time. So you do the WWE run, and then you and Hulk obviously were so close. So you guys do the Australia tour, the Hulkamania Australia tour, which is, so you go over there, and Hulk can't really go anymore the way he used to be able to. It's him and Flair on top. How did that for you? What was the experience like of doing that tour? did you think it was going to become part of something bigger that you were going to tour the world with?
No, it was a one-time deal. The promoters, and I just got a phone call from the. It was Michael Condon Sr. and Michael Condon Jr. At that time, they had been very, very, very successful rock and roll promoters in Australia. They brought the Rolling Stones over. They bring the biggest acts in rock and roll and music, as well as other forms of entertainment. They were very successful promoters. They had a lot of resources. And they called me and said, hey, would you be interested in bringing Hulk Hogan over? We'd like to do a Hulkamania tour. Well, they didn't call it a Hulkamania tour, but we'd like to bring Hulk Hogan over and be part of a tour. And they offered a lot of money. So I went to Hulk and said, do you want to put a crew together and go over and do, I don't know what it was, 4 nights or 5 nights or 6 nights, but it was a lot of money. And it was supposed to be just a one-off opportunity. I was very excited about it for good reason. It was about the money. and I had never been to Australia before. I really wanted to experience that. So we put that deal together. But unfortunately, it wasn't malicious or it was just unfortunate. But the promoters booked the biggest buildings in Australia, and they spent a fortune promoting it because they really thought that they were going to sell out 30,000 Rod Laver Arena, for example. I don't know what the capacity is, but it's a big, big venue, outdoor stadium. And they booked the biggest buildings. They spent a fortune advertising. They promoted the shit out of it. They spent so much money that in the end, it didn't draw. Instead of putting 30,000 people in the Rod Laver Arena or whatever the capacity was, they put in about 50% of that. So they lost their ass, which meant that they didn't pay us ultimately the money they owed us because they gave us half the money up front. They were supposed to pay us half the money at the end of the tour. By the end of the tour, we were having conversations about what they owed us, and they just didn't have the money to pay us. So it ended very badly, but not because anybody was dishonest or did anything wrong other than perhaps overestimating the value.